A key inflation report out today offering some encouraging news for American consumers. The new numbers from April showing inflation slowing to an annual rate of 2.3%, the lowest since February 2021. That's defying economists' expectations and President Trump's ongoing trade war.
The new data getting some mixed reaction in the financial markets. The Dow is down, while the S&P 500 and NASDAQ are both seeing small bumps up here. Let's talk now with Aaron Klein. He's a former Treasury Department Deputy Assistant Secretary and a senior fellows at the Brookings Institution. What are you looking at when you see this inflation rate slowing? As we've also learned last week from the Fed, that tariffs had so far led to a 0.3% increase in prices this year.
Yeah, so look, the numbers are a little bit confusing. A lot of the inflation that's been driven over throughout the entire pandemic and post-pandemic has been heavily concentrated in housing, actually, in the value of housing and rent, et cetera. And so when you back that out, overall inflation has been somewhat stable. The tariff news is good news in the sense that it's doing less harm, the rolling back of it. But what you're finding, the China deal, the British deal, what you're finding with markets reacting is a little more confusing, because with inflation staying a little bit low, they think the Fed is not going to cut rates as much as it otherwise would have. And so markets are adjusting to that. Bond yields are up at about 4.5% for the 10-year. But, you know, the overall picture of our economy is it was going strong. Trump threw in this trade confusion. The economy ground to a halt in the first quarter, and now the question is, will the underlying momentum pick up, or will the Trump tariff spat slow it down?
To that point, consumer prices rose 0.2 percentage points last month. Are we seeing any signs that the tariff impacts are going to show up in the CPI?
Not yet. You know, the problem with these tariff impacts is they're on again, they're off again. It makes economists, business people, forecasters, that we're bouncing around the room trying to figure out what's happening here as the contours keep changing by Trump's whims. This is very good for keeping attention on the president and very bad for the fundamental economy, because at the end of the day, business loves certainty. It's difficult to make a forecast or a prediction. It's difficult to decide what to do for your business next year, to build a plant, how much to order from overseas, if you don't know what your cost structure is going to be. And you don't know what the tariff is going to be. We have to call in every day to see what the new deal is.
Some potentially very welcome news for your wallet. U.S. inflation slowing, I should say, to its lowest rate in more than 4 years. That, according to April's Consumer Price Index report. It's an unexpected and very welcome development that's defying economists' expectations amid President Trump's ongoing trade war. Let's go live right now to CNN business and politics correspondent Vanessa Yurkevich, who's watching all of this in New York. Vanessa, walk us through this morning's report. Where do things stand?
Encouraging signs, Wolf. Inflation continuing to move in the right direction, cooling on an annual basis to 2.3%. Also, on a monthly basis, ticking up slightly, but not too uncomfortable, up 0.2%. That's different than what we saw, however, in March, when we saw inflation on a monthly basis cooling down 0.1%. But I say all of this with a huge asterisk. That is because this report likely doesn't capture the full impact of President Trump's tariffs just yet, because, as we've been reporting, retailers have had about 5 to 7 weeks of pre-tariff inventory that they've been putting on shelves. So those prices for consumers have likely remained low. But just remember where we came from. Look at the height during the pandemic. We were about at 9% for inflation, and the Federal Reserve has done an incredible job of getting us down to that 2% target rate. The concern with tariffs, though, as they start to make their way into these reports and into prices, is does this line start to go back up again? That is something that economists and everyday consumers do not want to see. Let's look at where things shook out in this report. Food at home, that's prices at the grocery store, down 0.4%. That is the steepest drop, Wolf, that we have seen since 2020. And that is because egg prices, which we've been watching closely, down 12.7% in the month of April alone. Also worth watching, airline fares down 2.8%. Airlines have been warning people that consumer sentiment and consumer spending has softened a little bit. Maybe we're picking that up there. And Wolf, also let's watch these categories: home furnishings, vehicle parts. Home furnishings, because that's up 1%. Those for home furnishings coming in from China, and vehicle parts. We know that there's a 25% tariff on foreign vehicle parts coming into the country. Look at those prices already starting to tick up. We need to keep an eye on this report and these prices because economists estimate that we'll likely see the pickup of these tariffs, Wolf, coming in the summer. But this report so far paints a really nice picture of inflation so far. Wolf?
All right, let's hope it stays that way. Vanessa Yurkevich, thank you very, very much.
Investors are responding to brand new inflation numbers. You see a little bit of a mixed bag there. NASDAQ up, S&P up. The Dow down just by a bit. But there is new data that just landed from the Labor Department showing inflation year over year actually slowed to the lowest annual inflation rate since February of 2021. CNN, Zane Asher, wearing the color of money this morning for us. What can you tell us about that?
I have a habit of doing that, by the way.
You do. You're the money lady. You got to.
So these numbers are actually tricky because when you think about it, CPI obviously is hugely important because it tells us the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on rising prices. It also is a key metric for the Fed as it determines how to handle monetary policy going forward. But the key thing about this particular report is that it is backward looking. It's looking at April. And so what that tells us is that these numbers don't show the full weight of Donald Trump's tariffs just yet. That doesn't mean they won't in the future. A lot of economists are saying that by next month, we'll really see the impact of these tariffs come alive. I want to show you what the numbers actually show. So year over year, if we could go back to the previous graphic, year over year, 2.3%. That is the lowest level, just in terms of inflation, in 4 years, as you pointed out, February 2021. Also, when you look at the monthly figure, 0.2%, that is much better than expected when you consider March, which came in at 0.3%. And actually, what I think is really interesting is when you look at core inflation, which just basically strips out things that are really volatile, like energy and food costs. When you look at core inflation, that number also really solid. You had a lot of economists that were saying to themselves, okay, let's look at car prices, new car prices, used car prices specifically, because that is where we're going to see price hikes, and we didn't even get that this time. What I think is really important is that we are not out of the woods just yet. When you think about what's happened since April 2nd, we've had all these different pauses. 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, 90-day pause on the triple-digit tariffs against China. These are just temporary pauses, Sarah. So they could easily snap back. What will that mean for rising prices? It's also worth noting that even though the worst of the tariffs, we've sort of dodged a bullet with the worst of them. Think about the fact that we have 30% tariffs against China still in effect. We've got 10% tariffs on much of the world still in effect. We have 25% tariffs on steel, on aluminium, I want to say, but you Americans say aluminum.
Aluminium.
Is it spelled different? I need to find out if it's
spelled the same.
Is it spelled the same? Okay.
Yes.
So 25% tariffs on aluminum. I'm going to get that word correct.
It's fine. Say it your way.
And 25% tariffs on autos. All of that's still in effect. You have to understand that that does have an inflationary effect on the economy. So just because it hasn't shown up in the data just yet doesn't mean that it won't at some point.
One thing that we know that this will probably be touted by the White House. They're looking at these things and saying, hey, everyone's saying doomsday, but look at the numbers, even though they are backwards
looking. We saw the same thing with the jobs report as well.
Exactly. It is so wonderful to see you speaking the Queen's English, our Zane Asher here.
And I'm going to get my aluminium.
You say it your way, girl.
Yes,
aluminium.
I'm a rebel, and so I do what I want.
Excellent. I support that. Thank you, darling.